You know, it's been a couple weeks since we've had our lessons. Last week we were off. We were on the week before, and we're off the week before that. With all these fires and evacuation warnings and whatever else, it's been delays through September. But hopefully we'll keep consistent now every week through October, and we can finally get through the trumpets. We'll see how far we get tonight. So let's begin with prayer and see what the Lord has for us. Loving Father, we do thank you for a new month you've given, how quickly the year is passing. And we thank you that the fires are soon to be out. We look forward to the rain, Lord.
Amen.
We need the rain of your Spirit tonight.
Amen.
We need your power and your presence. We look forward to getting back on the saddle here and moving forward through the end of the year with so the heavy chapters soon to be behind us. But we need wisdom because chapter 9 is probably the most challenging of the whole book. So give us grace and strength. May your angels be here in your spirit and bless us with your presence. Thank you. May we have wisdom from heaven as we look at these verses now. In the precious name of Jesus and by his blood we pray. Amen. What we're going to do tonight, before we get to the meat, we're going to do another review. We have to do review almost every week now because of being off a week, on a week, off a week, so forth. And the Lord kind of impressed me to focus on something on the first page of the lesson. Now, this lesson I sent out like 3 weeks ago. So, we've had time to fill it out. But we need to go back to the beginning of the book. But before we do that, I want to read the first paragraph of the lesson, tonight's lesson, lesson 16. Because there's something that's going to pop up that we need to keep in mind. So it's talking about true humility is to be teachable. Jesus laid bare the first principles of truth and showed Nicodemus that his first need was humility of heart, a teachable spirit, a new heart. In choosing men and women for his service, God does not ask whether they possess learning or eloquence or worldly wealth. He asks, do they walk in such humility that I can teach them my way? Can I put my words into their lips? And that's from volume 7, Testimonies 144, paragraph 2. But here's what I wanted to focus on. The next line says, I decided to start with a few SOP statements since we need constantly to feast the mind on the testimony of Jesus. I know the Lord impressed me this because I had forgotten what was here. And this came to my mind yesterday, and then again this morning. And then when I read it here in the lesson, it was confirmation that the Lord was on the right track with me. So I want to go back to chapter 1. I'm going to put up on the screen here what we looked at in the beginning. Can everybody see this? What we looked at in the beginning with the testimony of Jesus. Chapter 1, verse 2 through 9. And I just want to focus on the testimony of Jesus in verse 2 and verse 9. It's repeated, they're bookends in this chiasm. The thing that the Lord gave me, the testimony of Jesus involves his suffering. Now, I don't have it here, but if you look in verse 9, chapter 1, it says, John, who also am your brother and companion. The next 2 or 3 words is in tribulation. So that's the suffering aspect of the testimony of Jesus. The testimony of Jesus also involves faith. What we see here in the pinnacle point, verse 5, He's the faithful witness. And then the testimony of Jesus involves one other thing.
Patience.
Well, true, it involves several things, but the reason I'm bringing these three things up is because there's a pattern that we will see again. I wanted to show you one other thing. So you let me know if you can see this okay. Where did it go? Can everybody see that? It talks about if you go to Revelation 1 verse, I think it's 14, it talks about Jesus' feet as fine brass. And once again, this is dealing with the subject of suffering. This is the pinnacle point of this passage. And fine brass is burned in a furnace, like it says there. And so the testimony of Jesus, if you're taking notes, involves suffering, it involves faith, and it involves praise. All three of these we find at the cross. So obviously there was suffering at the cross. The faithful martyr, Revelation 1:5, or the martyr of faith, that was the cross referred to. And there's also praise at the cross, as we will see when we look at Psalm 22 later in the quarter. So that's what we find in chapter 1. It's just a review. As we look at the outline and the testimony of Jesus, we find that this picture is throughout the entire book. And with the seals and with the trumpets, we have a tendency to lose this picture, because it's easy to get bogged down in the weeds. In chapters 2 and 3, we see the testimony of Jesus given to the 7 churches. Chapters 4 and 5, we see a throne scene and the introduction of the Lamb. And in 6 and 7, as I just mentioned, the seals, and God checks out the churches to see what they've done with the messages that have been given them. And now we're in chapter 9, 8 and 9, dealing with the trumpets. So there's one more thing I want to show you, and then we're going to move into the meat of tonight's study. This is just appetizer review. So you may have remembered we looked at this back on when we first started the trumpets. And this is a thought that came to me. The testimony of Jesus is dealing with this subject here in the middle, primarily, because it's dealing with the atonement. And let me just kind of highlight this so everybody can see it, or at least circle it. So the middle of this envelope construction, we're dealing with prayers going up and being mingled with incense in the heavenly sanctuary, in the censer. And obviously Christ is in the midst of all of this. This is highly important because this is the beginning of right before the trumpets are to be blown. And this picture with incense shows us that this is the final atonement, final purification of God's people. They obviously, you might say it's the fact that they've been already sealed. They are now ready to receive the final outpouring, as we see down here in verse 6. They prepared themselves to sound. But first we see this tremendous, much incense, and prayers of the saints are ascending to heaven. And this is right before the latter rain comes. Obviously, we see mediation, intercession on both ends of this, and mediation is in the middle of it. And the thought that struck me is that the testimony of Jesus is dealing with this very truth that God is about to reveal, Christ is about to reveal to his people, to give a message to the world that involves the testimony, the revelation of who he is. And it's going to involve suffering. God's people are going to have need of faith, but there's going to be the anthem of praise through the process. And the reason why I'm bringing this up at this juncture is because it's very easy to get bogged down in the weeds when we get into the trumpets. And so I wanted to back up, and the Lord put this in my mind. As we go through the book of Revelation, we need to ever keep in mind it's the testimony of Jesus. The revelation of God, the revelation of Christ, involves his testimony that he gives to his people, and they will give that testimony united to the world. And that's going to be the convincing argument, or the convincing evidence that God is able to do as he said he did. He's able to have a people that reflect his image perfectly. Dan, you're muted. So if you were saying something, I didn't pick it up. So I wanted to do a quick review on that before we get back into the fifth woe, or the fifth trumpet, first woe. But I also wanted to look at a couple spirit of prophecy statements before we do. Down at the bottom of the first page, you'll notice it says, it's a review and herald statement, and it says, have special meetings when you can, meetings of humiliation, of afflicting the soul. That's a Day of Atonement term. Meetings where the rubbish shall be cleared away from the door of the heart, that the blessed Savior may enter. Now, it's too bad that under COVID, many of our meetings have been curtailed, and many souls have not received this refreshing in a church setting, or at least in church meetings. But we continue to meet, and I have to believe that God has other of his people in groups, little groups all over the land, who are praying for the Spirit, afflicting the soul, meetings of humiliation. And I like this next one especially too, from volume 1 of the Testimonies. Oh, how precious was this promise as it was shown to me in vision. I will come into him and will sup with him, and he with me. Oh, the love, the wondrous love of God. After all our lukewarmness and sins, he says, return unto me, and I will return unto thee. I will heal all thy backslidings. That's a tremendous promise that we can all claim. So I wanted to kind of do a review on that as we go through the book. We need to remember that the revelation of Jesus involves his testimony given to his people. And it, as we all know, it's going to involve suffering, faith, we will need, and yet it will be punctuated with praise. Okay, so moving on to, there's one more thing I wanted to show you. I hope this is big enough for everybody to see. It's covering most of my screen. We've looked at this many, many weeks ago, months ago even. But what we're going to do on this next slide I'm going to bring up, it's going to just focus on these last three. And I will add another column this next week. But it's just in quick review, we're focusing on the fifth woe that's dealing with the information here on the first line. Of course, this was Jesus' seven last words, the last 3 words on the cross. We're going to come back to that later. The church is Sardis, that gives the trumpet sound of the first woe, fifth trumpet. And the message he gives, the 3 angels' message, is the Sabbath message. Now, why this is important, because as we look at the church, the Sardis church and the council that commendation that Christ gave them. They shall walk with me in white. They're worthy, and I will not blot out their name, but confess their name. And of course, the seals was, these are the souls slain. And obviously they're not, this is not meaning that they're dead, because they couldn't be given the message of worship. But they've died to self, and it also involves all those over the course of human history, God's people who have been under the altar. Their blood speaks all the way to the end of time, their testimony. But as it says here under this seal, white robes are given unto them, and that they rest for a little season. So obviously, with the white robes, not blotting out their name, and what we're going to see, what we already looked at in the first woe, the fifth trumpet, I think it's verse 4, that said, hurt not the earth, neither the sea, nor the trees. I'm sorry, that's 7 verse 1. But 9 verse 4 says that they were commanded not to hurt the earth, the trees, or grass, only those men which have not the seal of God. Well, we know from inspiration that and scripture, the Sabbath message is that seal. And it is not coincidence that it's the Sardis church blowing this message, which is the fifth trumpet. So there we have a verse right there in the heart of the first woe, the fifth trumpet. Don't hurt those who have been sealed. So I just wanted to bring this out because we're going to be looking at this once we get to the sixth trumpet. But this is a reminder, looking at all of these facets in a table, that helps us understand those who are giving this message, the Sardis church members. Okay, since we have been a number of weeks already on the fifth trumpet, we're picking up in verse 7 tonight, and we'll see how far we can get. I'd like to get to 11, and we could finish this first woe, but let's see how far. I don't want to, push us, but let's see how far we can get. As I have stated before, this is the probably most complex chapter in the entire book. And the fifth seal, on the fifth trumpet, is probably even more difficult to figure out than the sixth. So we can get through this first woe, then it's going to be a lot easier getting through the rest of the book. I will tell you this: when we finish the sixth trumpet, we're going to go. I didn't bring it up here, but if you have your chart, if you look down at the bottom of the chart between the sixth and the seventh trumpet, there's an insert. We saw this with the seals. We will see it with the trumpets, and we will see it with the plagues. The insert means all of those chapters we're going to be looking at before we get to the seventh trumpet. So I suspect we're not even going to get to the seventh trumpet until next year, because all of that stuff is going to be happening between number 6 and number 7. So there's several chapters, 10, 11, I think 12 is in there, 13 maybe, 17, and the first part of 18. And the reason why is because all of that is happening between number 6 and number 7. So we're going to spend some time going through these chapters before we get back to the seventh trumpet. Now, the seventh trumpet doesn't begin actually until 11:15. But I think it's part of the order of the book of Revelation. And so we want to do things orderly as God would have us do them. But there are going to be some exciting things that we see in those chapters. But let's finish up, if we can, the fifth trumpet tonight. Okay, you will probably, it's been very quiet, and I appreciate everybody's been on mute. but to be discussing this, you may need to unmute yourself. So let's begin. Why don't we read the paragraph I wrote above the fill in the blank? Dan, we'll start with you. If you could read 2 verses. Elena, you read 2 verses. And my wife will read 2 verses. And then we'll go back. We'll fill out the blanks.
Okay. And the shapes of the locusts like unto horses prepared unto battle, and on their heads as it were crowns like gold, and their faces as the faces of men. And they had hair as the hair of a woman, and their teeth were of teeth of lions. And they had breastplates, as it were breastplates of iron, and the sound of their wings as the sound of chariots of many horses running to battle.
Elena? Oh, Elena, you'll have to unmute yourself.
They had tails like scorpions, and their stings in their tails. Their power was to hurt men 5 months, and they had as king over them the angel of bottomless pit, whose name was Abaddon, but in Greek his name is Apollyon.
Okay. I'm sorry, honey. Let's get verse 12.
One woe is past. Behold, still 2 more woes are coming after these things.
Okay. So as we have seen with the first few verses of the chapter, if you want to pull out your study from last week, we found that the angel that fell was given a key to open this abyss, and out came this smoke and locust. The angel that fell, it seems to be clear who that is. Jesus said, Luke 10:19, I saw Satan fall as lightning from heaven. But it's interesting to note he's given a key. Who did we find that has the keys of death and hell?
Jesus, yeah.
Yeah, that's back in chapter 1, I think verses 17 or 18. This gives the impression that Satan is not going to open this pit until God gives him the key to open it. Once he gives him the key, then Satan can open it, and we see all this wickedness come out. So now we get up to verse 7, and it says that the shapes of the locusts are like unto horses prepared unto battle. Now, did anybody, did that seem straightforward to you? Or
well, horses are for battle anyway, right?
Horses are for battle in Old Testament times.
Yeah.
Horses could also indicate strength because they were battle. If we look at it in a modern setting, they would represent military might. So here we see these shapes. The shapes of these locusts are like horses. Well, if the locusts are destroying agents and the horses symbolize military strength, then historically we see the Arabian invasion spreading across the land like locusts when they went into Europe. That was an historical understanding. For us today, if we go back and we look at the prior lesson, out comes smoke out of this furnace and locusts. And we found that these locusts are, we go back to the book of Joel, locusts are destroying agents. So it's basically wickedness. Satan is given the key. Jesus gives him the key at the point in time you can open up this abyss. And out comes all this wickedness. We also saw, I believe, that in last week's lesson, or the lesson before, that I believe it was the smoke that symbolizes spiritualism. Did we discuss that?
Yes. And false teachings.
Yeah. Well, so false teaching, spiritualism, this is going to become more prominent in tonight's lesson.
Yeah.
Now, yes.
Can I ask you a question on this one verse? So when I was looking up in the Handy Dandy symbol book, under horses and locusts and those things, also besides strength was pride and lust. And I was just thinking that what happens if these horses that are being spread all over are also spreading the strength of pride and lust in the last days to divert people's attention, to keep them in a state of unpreparedness? So would that go along with that verse,
No,
or am I getting too
no,
much into that and stick
no,
with
you're
the
not
strength?
reading too much at all. A matter of fact, we will be looking in the next few verses how that is another component,
Right.
especially when we get down to the hair as the hair of women.
Mm-hmm.
We'll look at
Right.
that. And the teeth is teeth of lions, and their breastplates is breastplates of iron. All that comes into this.
Okay.
So
All right.
I think you're right on the right track there, Deanne. And we just need to wait until we get there. But it can apply here too, because look at America today. Look at every nation in the world that is a powerful nation. They have strong military might. It's the weak nations that don't have very strong military. So what happens when you have a strong military? What happens to that nation? They become puffed up.
Definitely pride.
So that certainly fits.
Yeah.
That certainly fits here.
Look at our president alone.
Look at our president.
He's a very prideful,
very arrogant man.
Very arrogant. Yes.
And if you look at the last several presidents, every next president it seems to be more prideful from the one before.
Yeah.
And Mary and I met with a lady when Donald Trump was running here in Bidwell Park. She came up, her cousin lives here. And this lady, another Adventist, she was just ranting and raving about President Trump. And the discussion at the time was, oh, he's another Nebuchadnezzar. I said, well, that fits him. So let's go on to the next segment of the verse. And on their heads as it were crowns like gold. Now that's a very important word, like gold. Didn't say crowns as gold. It said crowns like gold. Now what do you take from that? How would you understand that?
Well, I put the pride back in that one also for the love of self, because gold is love and faith. So the opposite of that would be love of self. Fake crowns, basically.
Fake crowns.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that will work. Did anybody have anything else? Hun, did you have anything on that? I wrote down false glory.
False. Yeah, false for sure.
And I want to read you a statement. I looked this up because this came to my mind when I was looking at this. There's a statement in The Great Controversy in the chapter, Can Our Dead Speak to Us? And it's dealing with spiritualism. And this is what it said. Even in its present, let me back up to the prior paragraph. It is true that spiritualism is now changing its form. Now, of course, this is 100 years ago, and veiling some of its more objectionable features. It's assuming a Christian guise. But its utterances from the platform and the press have been before the public for many years, and in these, its real character stands revealed. These teachings cannot be denied or hidden. Even in its present form, so far from being more worthy of toleration than formerly, it is really a more dangerous because a more subtle deception. While it formerly denounced Christ in the Bible, it now professes to accept both. But the Bible is interpreted in a manner that is pleasing to the renewed heart. While its solemn and vital truths are made of no effect, love is dwelt upon as the chief attribute of God, but it is degraded to a weak sentimentalism, making little distinction between good and evil, God's justice, his denunciations of sin, The requirements of his holy law are kept out of sight. The people are taught to regard the Decalogue as a dead letter. Pleasing, bewitching fables captivate the senses and lead men to reject the Bible as the foundation of their faith. And so this statement came to my mind at this point, because here they have crowns like gold. And obviously, if this is these locusts, like horses prepared on the battle, they have crowns like gold, the faces of men. It's a false presentation of truth. And it's a false garb of Christianity, because spiritualism is now taking the mask of Christianity. And a lot of Christians today, because they don't understand sin, what it really is, because they don't keep the Ten Commandments, the lines have become blurred. And we hear such things, and I know I have a relative that's into holy yoga. That's an oxymoron. Yoga can't be holy. But many Christians in the last few years have gotten involved with that. Well, that's spiritualistic. Christians don't have any business dabbling in spiritualism, but it's happening. Most of the Christian world believes when you die, that just means you go to heaven. So that's a door entrance to spiritualism, or, you know, believing in the spirit world. Because if Aunt Lucy shows up, who died 7 years ago, and her husband is there, or her nephew, oh, this is Aunt Lucy. No, it's not. And then now they just invited demons into their home. So Christianity has opened the door because of their teaching of the state of the dead for many, many years, long time. But now they're dabbling in other areas of the occult. So yes, I think you're right on with that. Pride is involved in that too, Deanne. There's another text that comes to mind. You may want to write down in your notes. 2 Timothy 3:5. And you all know the text. It has to do with it. Paul just has finished reading a list of all these things that will happen in the last days. And then he says, what? Having a form of godliness, but denying the power thereof. So that's what false Christianity teaches. Form of godliness, but denying the power. All right, let's go on to number 8. Let's finish number 7. Their faces as the faces of men. Did anybody have anything that struck you on that? Faces?
I'm hoping Mary did. Because you do extra studies. That's all I'm saying. I was hoping you'd have something, because I didn't have anything.
She has something to tell us when we get to the teeth.
Oh, okay.
And she already told me.
Oh, okay.
But she might have something here.
Well, one thing, you on this section about, you're talking about spiritualism, when those who die, you're kind of saying,
yeah.
But this is a real, I think we pass over that quickly, because we think, it's just for those, even in the evangelical churches, that think that when a person dies, they can, or they come and visit or whatever, but that's going to be really deceptive,
That's
even
true.
for us in our churches, because, and I've always thought of it this way. I'm just talking to myself, but I've always thought of it that it would be like if Brianna came to me and she smelled that way and she looked that way and she talked that way, and then touch.
Yeah.
So we're going to have to be so grounded in the word that when we see somebody in front of us that we absolutely want to see, that the word, we have to go to the word. So this is, I think, going to be a big thing. Truthfully, I think it's going to be a big thing even for Adventists. Big thing. Even though we say it real easy, well, when somebody dies, they whatever. But this is going to be a really big test.
Yeah.
And I only say that because growing up in the Catholic Church and the way we believe. But when you know this, after Brianna passed away, I shut her door for like, I think it was like 2 weeks. I wouldn't even have her door open because I just knew that the devil would try and lure me in that way because you want it so bad.
So bad.
Yeah. So I think that this is a real big thing. And in regards to the face of a man, looking at this all as coming out of the bottomless pit, and these, all the demons are just unleashed on us. There's going to just be so many of them, of course, that I mean, only thing I took on that is that from what I read was that they're going to be faces of men. So of course they're going to be impersonating humans.
Correct. I had to go back to my notes in my Bible from 30 years ago. I think I had mentioned a couple of weeks back, Mary and I went over this chapter in detail when we were our first vacation in Hawaii. And we spent a couple hours on a Sabbath afternoon, and that was what we did. And I still have notes from that. I wrote them right in my Bible. So I looked them up, and I saw that this part of the text, faces as the faces of men, I wrote down as the appearance of light. But in reality, these are masquerading demons.
Oh, wow.
Faces as the faces of men. And then the text came to mind, and we've all read it, 2 Corinthians 11:14. Paul says about Satan himself transforming himself into an angel of light.
Angel of light.
And then the next verse says, and his ministers are also transformed. So here we have faces as the faces of men. We've already seen the line above dealing with the crowns like gold, their heads as crowns of gold. So we're dealing obviously with a substitute to the genuine. And that's what spiritualism is, as I was mentioning. It's taken on the garb of Christianity in this day and age. And the lines are so blurred because people don't know what sin is, what truth is apart from error. And so spiritualism, and as my wife was just saying, though I passed over it, it's true regarding the subjects of the state of the dead. It's not just going to be a temptation for those in the evangelical world. Our own. I never really saw that as such until we lost Brianna, because it was head knowledge. But once you lose somebody close to you, family member, now it touched the emotional nerve and the pain and how raw you are for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a far stretch to think I could be deceived, not because I don't know better, but because of the emotional. In the early days, the emotional aspect is in such raw grief that to have a dream or a vivid representation of our daughter show up, that would be an almost overwhelming deception.
Wow.
Just from the personal experience. If we hadn't lost her, then that wouldn't be my experience. And that goes for all of us who have lost loved ones. So the devil is going to come at us, or one of his agents, to deceive God's people on this point. But it's mainly going to be those who have gone through tremendous grief, I think, and losing a close loved one. So let's go on. Does anybody have anything more to say on verse 7? Are we good to go? Is it pretty clear? Did that help kind of breaking it up in parts like that? Because keep in mind, the first woe, we're dealing with these locusts, the smoke that's let out of the pit. And it's wickedness. And I'm going to bring some things up here in verse 8. We may not get really any further than that go along with what I said earlier before we got into this segment. And hopefully it will connect some dots. So verse 8 says, and they had hair as the hair of women. Now put your spiritual thinking caps on. What does the Bible say about a woman's hair? I mean, I've got 4 ladies here, you should know.
it's her glory, right?
It's Paul said,
Glory.
glory. Now, we already kind of alluded to that, the crowns like gold earlier. But here we have hair as the hair of women. Now, in the historical, these are these Marauding tribes, these Arabian tribes on these horses, and they have long hair, and they have breastplates, and they have crowns like gold. You can get the picture. We've seen them in the books. And there are hundreds of them lined up going across the desert, you know. That's the historical application. But a contemporary application, a woman in Bible prophecy is
Church.
Church.
So if we've got hair as a hair of women, and this is dealing with a church, who in the especially this book, we've got two women that are on central stage. One is a pure woman, the other is a harlot. So just like we saw with the faces of men, now we have hair as a hair of women. It's not the genuine. So since hair is the glory of a woman, I wrote down, this is the glory of Babylon's daughters. It's false glory. It's not genuine.
Okay.
Did anybody have anything like that? Or
Well, it could be like how Deanne was saying, it could be pride.
Pride.
Because hair consists or makes a horn.
Yeah.
And horns are what? Strength or pride or prideful. So, you know, again, they, like you just said, and like Deanne said earlier, you know, you've got this pride and all this stuff that's going on, right? Lust, all this.
True.
Yeah. Instead of love for God, you've got love for self, glorying themselves.
Right. And see, this is the deception. When we think of wickedness and corruption, we sometimes get this awful, you know, what we see taking place in our cities this summer with all these Marxist ideologists destroying these buildings, just evil. But the devil is not stupid. He knows that deception is what's going to destroy the world. People will run if he shows up with a pitchfork and horns. You know what I mean? So he puts on a coat, a suit and tie, and joins the church, sits on the front row like a good Christian, a wolf in sheep's clothing. That's what the people of the Lord need to fear. And that's why we're told that it's going to, when he impersonates Christ, it's going to be an almost a nearly overwhelming deception. Millions will go out. Oh, the Christ is here, and they'll come and worship. He'll perform many of the same miracles Jesus did. Doesn't have any semblance of evil at all. That's where the real deception is. Okay. So we got by that one pretty good. How about the next one? And their teeth were as the teeth of lions. Now, I know my wife has something to say on this.
On the teeth?
Yeah.
Well, the little bit that I looked up, one verse led to another. I looked in Job 29:17, and it said that they broke the fangs of the wicked and they plucked the victims from their teeth. So, of course, they're trying to catch their prey, and they're catching them, of course, with their teeth. And you think about it says teeth of lions. Well, Satan goes around like a roaring lion.
True.
Mm-hmm.
So
Peter 5:8.
yeah. So, and like I said, Job 29:17, it calls those people with those teeth are wicked. So that's another way to know too that we're talking about, you know, it's a wicked one that has that's doing that.
I found a verse in Joel 1 verse 6.
Yeah. Likening
unto the lion's teeth, and the idea came, words that chop. Have we ever heard that illustration? Oh, this man, he just ate him up. Words that chop people up. We can, you know, kill people with our words. So teeth, we've all heard, I think, the expression, oh, he just grinded him with his teeth. Obviously, it's not literal. But with his acidic spirit and aggressive words, he just chewed that other guy up.
Shoot 'em up.
There's another verse you can look up. I looked up Nahum 2, verse 11 through 13. It's also dealing with, you got to put them together with Joel and 2 Peter 5:8, because that one's mainly dealing with lions. I don't know if anything's said in there about teeth. But the one in Joel, and of course, Job 29:17, as my wife mentioned. You take all these texts together and you get a picture. That's, again, like the Bible says, line upon line, precept upon precept.
And if you take John 10:10, when Jesus said Satan comes to kill, steal, and destroy.
Good text, Elena. Yes, absolutely. But I've come to give life, give it more abundant.
Yeah.
Did you say John 10:10?
Correct.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's a great verse. So I think that's pretty clear with the teeth of lions. You know, it gives us the picture that we're seeing here. Faces is the face of men, hair is the hair of women, teeth is the teeth of lions. You put all this together and look at this picture. You've got wickedness in the churches, pride, glory, lust, and this is all happening under the fifth trumpet. I can put it back up on the screen, but just picture with me that fifth trumpet is giving the fifth part of the three angels' message. This is all happening as that message goes out. Satan has been given a key and he unlocks all this wickedness. This very likely could be leading up to and on the other side of the Sabbath Sunday crisis. Because God's people are sealed at this fifth trumpet, fifth seal, and they're giving the message, the Sabbath sealing message from during the fifth trumpet. So all this stuff we can expect to happen surrounding the Sunday laws.
There's another verse in Proverbs too, Proverbs 30, verse 14.
Proverbs 30, verse 14. 30, verse 14.
Well, that's just frightening.
I know. It says, there is a generation whose teeth are like swords and whose fangs are like knives, to devour the poor from off the earth and the needy from among them, from among men.
Yeah, that's frightening because it describes the day we're living.
Exactly.
But it's very fitting here. Very fitting. I think these are great verses. There's also a verse in chapter 22 of Psalms that Jesus felt like he was going to be devoured by lions. A lion's mouth gaping me. I think it's verse 12, 13. So once again, we see this picture here. Do we have time to get to one more verse, verse 9? Or shall we wrap things up? Quarter till. I'd like to finish by 8. Let's see how far we get with 9. And they had breastplates, as it were, the breastplates of iron. Now here again, these tremendous symbols. I wrote down breastplates. Did anybody write down what breastplates are used for?
Judgment.
Okay. Historically, that's true, but historically, one of the ways they were used here, these Arabian marauders had an armor on, at least breastplate. So it's used as a protection to the body. Now you mentioned the breastplate as judgment.
Well, it also has to do with a priest, but we're not going to go that way, right? He had the 12 tribes on his breastplate, right?
Well, no, we will.
Oh, okay.
But before we get there, let's look at it was known, it was known as the breastplate of judgment.
Mm-hmm.
And you had the Urim and the Thummim up here, which dealt with judgment questions involving yea or nay. So I want you to look at a verse It's in 1 Thessalonians 5, verse 8. Tell me what Paul says there about the breastplate. I see you shaking your head, Stacy.
It says, putting on the breastplate of faith and love, and as a helmet, the hope of salvation.
Breastplate of faith and love. What comes to your mind when you look at this verse here? They had breastplates of iron.
Well, you know, one thing that wasn't mentioned, but the original use for the breastplate was to protect them from getting a direct attack into the heart or into the intestines, either of which meant you died that day at some point in time.
So you're giving us a literal reason for why you would wear a breastplate.
Yeah, but I'm just saying, if you're going to consider all the different angles, but I like this one because, but it's, I don't know that, it seems like your insects, that's what you want to call them, you know, they're on the other side. And the breastplate of faith and love, that's us holding on to Jesus.
Okay, good.
Yeah, I had to look at what the breastplate was made out of.
Let's say iron.
Iron.
Correct. So in Jeremiah 6:28, it says, they are all children rebels, walking as slanderers. They are bronze and iron.
Can you read that again, babe? It didn't come through too well.
Okay. It says, they are all stubborn rebels, walking as slanderers. They are bronze and iron. They are all corrupters. So I had to look at what the breastplate was made out of.
And that was Jeremiah 29.
No, 6:28.
6:28.
So those breastplates are, those who are wearing them are corrupters. They're slanderers.
Just
Okay.
the opposite of your breastplate of your
Of
the
faith.
armor, whole armor of God.
You are going, Deanne, where I was going to go next.
Yeah.
So we see a counterfeit here, an opposite.
Counterfeits. Mm-hmm.
The
Corruption.
the breastplate of faith and love. What is the opposite of faith?
Unbelief.
Unbelief or doubt. And the opposite of love?
Hate.
Hate. So you've got unbelief and hate, or those who doubt and are haters. Well, that would go along with stubborn, rebels, corrupters, slanderers.
So through all of this that we're looking at, the locusts, they come out anyway. It's all opposite. You know what I mean? What you had just said. They're all opposite of. They're all counterfeit.
Counterfeit.
Not opposite. A counterfeit of what the true is.
Exactly. And this would make sense because wickedness, spiritualism, Satan is going to try to counterfeit everything God does. And so, and we see it already in our world, as the world is ever more becoming polarized. We have seen, I think, this year, more division. It's like it's building every year. There's more contention, more strife, more conflict. And yet somehow Satan's going to bring all these parties together. But they will not unite, like Daniel 2 says. They will appear, the iron and the clay will appear to mix, but they won't mix. And it's going to be, as when we get to Revelation 16, the dragon, the beast, the false prophet, and they're in this three unholy wed accord. And spiritualism is the glue that keeps them all together. It's just Babylon is one big massive confusion and deception. Okay, well, I think we made some progress tonight. Oh, let's finish this one part. So the result of these breastplates of iron, the sound of their wings is the sound of chariots of many horses running to battle. Let's see if we can finish that up, and then we'll leave 10 for next week. Many horses, sound of their wings. So again, to understand the spiritual, let's look at the natural. Historically, you got all these horses, and they're running together. The sound of their wings. Mary was outside the other day, and she heard this whoosh. And she looked around. What was that? It was a big bird that flew by, right? Not very high over her head. The sound of the wings, you can hear the wind going by through because of those wings. So you get a bunch of horses galloping together. John didn't know how to put this down, and he sees them all together, and it probably sounded like wings of birds. The sound of their wings. Now, when we see wings, what do we think of? Flight, but also speed. It's the sound of chariots of many horses running to battle. So again, what are we dealing with? A military engagement. Or is the Christian to be considered at war? Are we not in a great controversy? So there's a battle going on in the spiritual realm, in the spiritual sense. So what did anybody come up with anything on this? No. This is what I came up with. This false religious system will work with great speed using the conflict or using the militaries in conflict with other nations of the world. And because it's going to surround religious issues, the papacy is going to be using, especially the United States military, to enforce through the legislative processes its dogmas. And he will probably do the same to the other militaries of other nations. You either worship, bow down to this image, or else military strength, force. That's what I could see here. Because once again, the fifth angel that sounds, the consequence on earth, we're reading about, but it's all going to have spiritual connotation. And we know it's going to involve the Sabbath Sunday crisis. And those two evils, Sunday sacredness and, as we talked tonight, immortality of the soul theory, that's going to be the glue, spiritualism, that binds all these churches together.
Maybe it's also just maybe it's also a description. If we're talking about these locusts, well, we know they're demons, and these are fallen angels. Fallen angels have wings.
Well, that's true too.
So we know that it says, and the sound of their wings. So basically the sound of these demons or these fallen angels is the sound of chariots of many horses running to battle.
That's a good point. I hadn't thought about it.
Well, they're definitely running to battle because they know, right, this is it. So they're doing everything swiftly.
And just like we saw surrounding the cross, Ellen White says there were demons in the crowd in the form of men. So we can expect in the last day we're going to see the same thing. Demons in the form of men to counteract the work of God through their deceptions. And that is where we're going to have to stop, because that leads right into verse 10, and the next page we will look at, because it deals with the very subject that I'm closing with. But we don't have time to get into that tonight. But we'll finish that up next week. But I think this was a real rewarding discussion. Do you think so too, Deanne?
Yeah, it's I think it's all going on today, you know, from what we just went over, all the deception and the things going on, lovers of self and even, you know, lust and all those other things coming all together at the last time. And he's using every available temptation, every available deception he can, whether it be spiritualism, you know, like your dear sweet Brianna or somebody like that, just bringing up whatever he can. I mean, it's all out in the open because time's short.
Right.
And so he's using everything, deception of every kind right
Ellen White
now.
says that Satan has been experimenting in the laboratories of nature for 6,000 years, and he's bringing out the most effective the most effective means that
Forms.
he's experimented with. Now that doesn't work. Let me try this. Oh, that works real well. I'll be sure to use that in the last day. And so all of those that are most effective, he's bringing out in the last one. And look at the world. The whole world is under this. You can't even turn on the news and watch politics, and you're constantly hearing lies, especially if you're watching fake news media. But I wouldn't be surprised that even on the right, they're exaggerating the truth here and there, you know, because they want the public to favor their views over the opposition's views. It's all a big propaganda machine. And where did they learn all this? From the great prince, the rebel prince. You know? So what we'll do is we'll finish up with especially 10 and 11 and the third page next week. But I think this was really rewarding because it helps us recognize that as God's people give the message, we're going to have opposition. We're going to have every, like you said, Dan, the devil is throwing every dart out there to try to keep people in bondage and darkness and confusion, deception.
Deception.
Because that's really where it's at. Truth versus deception. Okay, it's 8 o'clock. So we will pick this up next week and be sure to finish on the 5th trumpet. I will obviously not give a handout this week because we need to finish this one. But next Monday night, I will have number 6, the 6th trumpet ready. I will have a handout for that will be for the following week that you can start working on. All right, let me finish the recording. But just a 1-minute recap. Keep in mind, so with the testimony of Jesus, God's people are giving that testimony through each of these trumpets. Obviously, we're seeing here in the first woe, the 5th trumpet, that it's not pleasant. This is all the works of darkness that is taking place in these verses. But God shows both the good and the evil that is taking place on earth. And the messages must go forth to warn the world, the hour of his judgment that's here. So just keep that in mind as we continue going forward. Once we get out of chapter 9, we're going to see a more glorious picture of how all of these parts of the churches, the seals, and the trumpets come together. Because 10 and on kind of help us with that picture. And you'll see as we go through these other chapters that are inserts between number 6 and number 7. All right, I'm going to stop the recording and we'll pick it up, Lord willing, next week.